Freya's return in episode 4 opens on a note of overt intimidation rather than the passive-aggressive territorial squatting of episode 3, and this escalation matters because it marks a shift in how the show is willing to frame conflict between women, moving from a dispute over space and belonging into something closer to a study of coercion and the abuse of informal power. And Freya's declaration that she runs this house, that she takes what she wants, that Theodora should be scared because she still holds a spare key, functions less as playground bravado than as a genuine threat of boundary violation. The kind of low-grade intimidation many young women, and especially young queer women navigating an unfamiliar campus for the first time, recognize instantly as a specific and gendered form of control, one that relies not on physical force, but on the constant low-humming possibility of intrusion. The idea that your space, your privacy, your sense of safety in a place that is supposed to be yours can be undone at any moment by someone who has simply decided to claim power over you. Theodora's response, her flat refusal to be frightened, deserves to be read as meaningful character development rather than simple defiance, because this is a young woman we met in the previous episode still raw from heartbreak, still adjusting to an unwanted transplant into a new life, still uncertain of her footing, and the fact that she is able to meet Freya's threat without visibly collapsing into the same fragility we witnessed before speaks to real internal growth. Growth that the show wisely attributes not to any single dramatic turning point, but to the accumulated effect of having been treated, even briefly, with genuine respect and steady care by an adult who saw her clearly. Because confidence built through being witnessed accurately by someone trustworthy tends to be more durable than confidence built through avoidance or denial. And Theodora's ability to stand her ground here reflects the quiet, unglamorous work of emotional repair that the previous episode dramatized so carefully. When Spencer becomes aware of the renewed threat against Theodora, the show is presented with a pivotal choice about what kind of authority figure she will ultimately be. And it is worth being direct about why this choice matters so much within the broader cultural conversation the series is engaging with. Because stories about mentorship, guidance, and protective care between women, particularly queer women, carry real weight in a culture that has historically struggled to imagine such relationships as anything other than either desexualized and therefore unremarkable, or eroticized and therefore suspect. And a narrative that allows a mentor figure to hold her boundary consistently across multiple episodes, even under pressure, even when the emotional pull towards something more is acknowledged rather than denied, offers a genuinely valuable corrective to both of those reductive patterns. Spencer's decision to formally report Freya's threat rather than attempt to manage it informally or personally reflects an understanding that some problems cannot and should not be solved through private influence or charm, that the abuse of power, even low-stakes dormitory-level abuse of power, requires institutional accountability rather than individual intervention. And this is a meaningfully different Spencer than one who might have tried to handle Freya through private, relationship-based leverage. Because that alternative, however well-intentioned, would have simply replaced one informal power structure with another, whereas formal reporting draws a clear, defensible line between mentorship and enforcement, protecting both Theodora and the integrity of Spencer's role. The consequence Spencer imposes, relocating Freya to Allen Hall, reads as fair and proportionate rather than punitive for its own sake. And this matters because the show is implicitly making an argument about what healthy authority looks like among women, authority that is warm but not permissive, caring but not without consequence, invested in growth but unwilling to enable harm indefinitely. And this model stands in deliberate contrast to patterns of relational dysfunction that queer women in particular often have to learn to recognize and resist. Patterns in which affection or history is used as leverage to excuse ongoing harm, in which, but we have a connection, becomes an argument against accountability rather than a separate question entirely. It is worth dwelling on what the show avoids here, because the restraint is itself the substance of the critique, and had the narrative allowed Spencer's evident fondness for the students in her charge, her demonstrated warmth, her willingness to engage seriously with their emotional lives, to collapse into a justification for entangling herself romantically with someone she has direct power over, the story would have quietly endorsed a dynamic that shows up with troubling regularity in real accounts of exploitation within queer spaces, where genuine community intimacy and mentorship become the alibi under which more troubling power imbalances are allowed to operate unchecked. And by having Spencer hold her position instead, firmly and without contradiction, the show insists that care and boundary are not opposites but partners, that the deepest form of respect she can offer these young women is precisely the discipline not to let her own feelings, however real, override her responsibility toward their well-being. This has particular resonance for lesbian and queer women navigating community spaces, because queer community is frequently small, overlapping, and short on formal structure, which means the informal authority wielded by slightly older, more established queer women. Whether as mentors, organizers, or simply more experienced members of a shared social world, carries enormous unexamined weight, and stories that dramatize what responsible stewardship of that weight actually looks like, choosing accountability over the comfort of unexamined closeness, perform real cultural work by giving queer audiences a model of care that does not require romantic or sexual entanglement to feel meaningful or affirming. Theodora's arc across these 2 episodes, from raw grief and displacement to steady self-possession in the face of a direct threat, also deserves recognition as a story fundamentally about the reclamation of voice, because the young woman we saw struggling to articulate her sadness to Spencer in episode 3 is now the young woman capable of telling Freya directly that she is not afraid, and this shift did not happen through romantic rescue or dramatic intervention, but through the slower, less cinematic process of being taken seriously, having her pain acknowledged without judgment, and receiving consistent, boundaried support that modeled for her what safety without complication actually feels like. And this is an important distinction to draw out, because narratives aimed at queer audiences do not always need to center romance to be meaningfully queer or meaningfully affirming, and a story about a young queer woman learning to trust her own resilience because an adult queer woman treated her with consistent respect is itself a valuable and underrepresented kind of story. There remains real value, too, in naming honestly what Freya represents within this narrative structure, because her arc, even softened from its more troubling original form, still dramatizes a genuine and worth-discussing pattern. The way some individuals within queer spaces learn to wield charm, history, or perceived intimacy as tools of control, testing whether affection or shared identity will be treated as grounds for exemption from ordinary standards of behavior, and Spencer's refusal to grant that exemption. Her insistence that being liked, being desired, being someone's history does not entitle a person to continued access or leniency when their behavior causes harm, models an ethic that deserves to be taken seriously rather than dismissed as simply cold or institutional. Because this ethic, that care for community well-being sometimes requires disappointing or even alienating individuals we feel warmly toward, is precisely the kind of unglamorous, structurally necessary labor that keeps queer community spaces safe and trustworthy over time. What emerges from this version of the episode is a story less about romance, threat, or spectacle than about the quiet infrastructure of protection. The systems and choices, both institutional and personal, that determine whether a young queer woman's first experience of a new community will teach her that vulnerability is safe or that it is exploitable. And by having Spencer choose consistently, across both the mentorship of episode 3 and the accountability of episode 4, to protect that infrastructure rather than her own immediate desires, the show offers something genuinely rare, a depiction of queer women in positions of informal power choosing responsibility over self-interest. And Theodora's growing confidence stands as the direct, legible proof of what that choice actually produces. A young woman who arrived on campus grieving and uncertain, now capable of facing down intimidation because someone, at the right moment, offered her care without conditions and without cost.